This video is about my router table and the changes I've made to it over the years and just some of the ways I use it. For some people, this video will be too detailed, so feel free to fast forward or simply not watch it. For others, it may raise questions about other jigs and other ways that I use the table that were not covered in this video. I tried to reach a happy medium. I purchased this Bosch router table many years ago. They still make it, but it's with a modified fence, which I think they did to reduce cost. There are two major pieces. First, there's the table, which was both open in the front and the back when I bought it, and a base on which the table sits. While there was dust collection port on the fence, sometimes the fence is used closed or moved altogether, but in any case, dust would always end up falling through the tabletop to below. So I enclosed it, and on the back I put a hinged door and a 4-inch dust port. In the front, I added this movable slat so that I could open it to provide makeup air, but it never needed it. There was enough leakage without it. The first enhancement I made was this drawer mounted near the top of the base. It holds my collection router bits. I have frame and panel bits, chamfering, OG, roundover, and other profiling bits, as well as flush trim bits and pattern bits. On the left side of the table, I added storage for feather boards, which I use on rare occasions, a blade guard, which I never use, and a pull-out shelf for the inserts, with various sized openings. On the right side, I have a caddy for a handheld router, because not all routing can be done on a table. And above that is a tool caddy, which houses the wrenches for changing the router bits and other tools for setting up the router, and for adjusting the height of the router using the router lift. These are my routers. I have two identical Bosch model 1617 EVS variable speed routers. The one not shown is in the router table, and it rarely leaves there. They each have a plunge base, which can adjust the bit down to a preset stop in between passes. Each also has a fixed router base, which can be adjusted in height, but then it is fixed until you once again unlock it, move the motor down, and lock it back down. I also have a smaller DeWalt router that fits in one hand, and I primarily use it for edge trimming. And then there's my original Sears Craftsman router dating to the 70s. It can only use bits with 1/4-inch shafts. With the Bosch routers, can use bits with both 1/4-inch shafts and 1/2-inch shafts. To change the bases on the Bosch routers, you simply release the lock and then lift the motor out of the base and reinstall it in the other. Then lock it back into place. These are the two bases that came with the router that is used in the table. The fixed base on the right has an edge guide installed on it. To the left is the plunge base, to which I have affixed an attachment point for a homemade trammel. The trammel has two adjustable foci. Just one can be used as a center for cutting circles, or both can be used for cutting ellipses. I've installed a 1/2-inch roundover bit and have adjusted the fence so that the opening is just wider than the bit. Also, I've aligned the fence to be even with the guide bearing on the top of the bit. I don't really need the fence, as I could just rely on the guide bearing, but this way it is safer because only part of the bit is exposed. The grand majority of the cuts on a router table can be made using the fence, but not always. Let's get rolling. Last year I wanted to add the capability to make beaded face frames efficiently, like this one. To make good quality beaded face frames, the joints have to be made in such a way so as to get a seamless appearance. First, at the corners, there is a notch and a chamfer on the stiles that mates with the notch on the inside of the rail. Then wherever there is a crosspiece, such as to divide the frame for a drawer on the top and a door at the bottom, there is a notch on the stile with two chamfers, and a crosspiece has two corresponding chamfers. Craig makes a router jig to help do this, but it costs $400. So I built my own jig. Craig sold their notching and beading bits separately, so I did buy those. First, I removed the router table fence before I can install the jig. I modified the table so that it was easy to remove and reinstall the fence. Previously, I had to reach under the table to remove 2 bolts, and then put the bolts back in when I wanted to reinstall the fence. This became even more of a pain when I enclosed the table for dust collection. I simply drilled holes in the fence tracks big enough for the bolt heads to go through. Now I can simply move it to those holes, lift it out, or position it over those holes and push it back in. So here is the jig. It is used with the notching bit. The beading bit is used to create the bead on the parts after they are notched. That operation uses a standard fence in a similar fashion as I demonstrated with the roundover bit. The jig consists of an aluminum extrusion mounted to a precision miter gauge and installs in the miter gauge slot on the table. There is a cutout on the extrusion that allows it to pass over the notching bit without it hitting the bit. I use stops on the front face of the extrusion to properly space the part relative to the bit. I also made these holders so that I can conveniently position the clamps to hold the workpiece. Here I am routing the chamfers on a face frame divider. Next, I route the notch in the rail to mate with the divider. Does the orientation of the fence matter when routing? For example, when the fence is square to the table versus if it is askew? Well, let's see. First, I will route a bead with the fence square to the table. It results in a nice bead. Next, I set the fence askew and route the other half of this board. Same result. The only thing that matters is the height of the bit and its distance from the fence. In fact, this bit has a guide bearing, so the fence isn't even needed. You just press the material against the bit until it hits the bearing. The use of a starter pin makes it safer to ease the material into the bit. And speaking of safety, does it matter which direction the material is fed across the bit? So far, we have fed the material right to left across the bit mounted in the table. Let's see what happens if we feed it the other way. When you feed it in this direction, it is in the same direction as the bit is turning, and it wants to grab the material and push it through. This is called climb cutting, and it is generally avoided. But with care, it can be used in some operations. I use it in a very light first pass when cutting dovetails on my dovetail jig. Well, let's look at the result of the notching and beading operations we performed. It's a perfect beaded joint. A little paint and the seams of that joint will disappear. I hope you enjoyed this video of my router table. There are a number of other jigs and techniques I use with the router table, but I did not want to make this video too long. It was long enough. But don't hesitate to ask any questions that you may have. See you at B&O.